The auto payment notification hits your phone on the 3rd of every month, and at this point, you do not read it, you just feel it land. Here is what it does not tell you. The dealership that sold you that car made about $279 on the vehicle itself, less than a set of decent tires. My name is Nick, and I read auto lending reports so you do not have to. That number is not a sign that dealers are struggling. It is a sign that the car was never the product. The money is somewhere else inside your contract, and it is still in there quietly on the 3rd of every month. Renee signed hers on a Thursday evening beside a bowl of butterscotch candies. Hector has signed his 3 times in 4 years. Delia signed hers 11 days after Renee on nearly the same car at a different store. One of them paid about $4,300 more than another. I will tell you which one at the end. Here is the thing almost nobody outside the car business understands. The vehicle is now functionally the bait. Front-end gross profit, the money made on the actual metal, has collapsed. 2 years before that $279 figure, it was north of $6,000. Meanwhile, the finance and insurance office was pulling around $1,975 per vehicle. Analysts now put that office at up to 73% of a dealership's variable gross profit. Nearly 3/4 of the profit comes out of a room most buyers do not know they are going to be sitting in. So say you spent 3 weeks reading reviews and emailing 4 dealers for quotes and walked out having talked them down $2,300. That is exactly what Renee did, and she was right to be proud of it. She also won the least important negotiation in the building, which is not a knock on Renee. It is a knock on a process that spent 40 years training us to stare at a number that stopped deciding the outcome. There is a worksheet at nearly every dealership in America called the 4 Square. 4 boxes on 1 page. The price, your trade, the down payment, the monthly payment. Its purpose is not to organize the deal. Its purpose is to make 4 separate negotiations feel like one conversation, because pressure applied to any one box shows up as relief in another. He will circle a number with a felt tip pen and slide the sheet toward you like a chess move. So we are going to take that sheet apart and go box by box, because everything that happened to you is sitting in one of them. Box 1, what you pay for the car. Box 2, what they give you for your old one. Box 3, the loan. Box 4, the back end, everything sold to you after you believed you were finished. Box 1 we have covered, $279. Whatever you squeezed out of the sticker. That was the fight they could afford to lose. Which means this gets interesting at Box 2, and Box 2 is where Hector lives. Hector drives for work. Cracked phone mount on the windshield, folder of receipts in the door pocket, and a new car roughly every 20 months since 2022. The first one was a Malibu. He owed about $4,000 more on it than it was worth, and the salesman said something that sounded, in the moment, like a kindness. Do not worry about it, we will just roll it into the new loan. And they did. The $4,000 he still owed on the car he was walking away from got added to the principal of the car he was walking toward. He did not write a check. He did not feel a thing. He simply began paying interest for the next 72 months on a Chevrolet he no longer owned. 2 years later, he did it again. That time, the hole was about $7,000 bigger than before because the original 4 had been quietly inflating the balance the entire time. Then, he did it a 3rd time. Hector is not an outlier. He is roughly the middle of the distribution. As of the 3rd quarter of 2025, 28.1% of new car trade-ins carried negative equity, averaging $6,905. Both records. And precision matters, so that figure is a mean, not a median. It is dragged up by the worst cases, meaning the typical underwater buyer is better off than the headline. The share is not in dispute. Rolled negative equity is the closest thing consumer finance has to a chain letter. Each transaction resolves the discomfort of the last one by making the next one worse, and because it never appears as a line you have to write a check for, it feels like nothing happened at all. Hector's 4th car is a perfectly sensible sedan. He is financing 3 previous cars inside of it. And here is what I actually want you to sit with, because being underwater does not feel like anything. That is the whole problem. Nothing arrives in the mail, no number turns red. It is completely invisible right up until the day you try to leave. It is checking your trade in value on your phone at a red light, and then checking it again because you assume you typed something in wrong. It is discovering that downgrading to a cheaper car would cost you $6,000 you do not have. It is the slow realization that the car in your driveway is not an asset you own, it is a bill you are standing next to. Which brings us to box 3, the loan. Box 3 has two halves, how long it runs and what it costs, and both were set by somebody else. Start with how long, because it is the biggest lever and the one people pull themselves. In 2015, loans of 84 months or longer were about 7.3% of new car financing. By mid-2025, that was 21.5%, and it has since touched a record 23.9%. 1 in 4 new car buyers signing a 7-year loan. That barely existed a decade ago, and it was not invented because buyers asked for it. It was invented because prices ran away from incomes and somebody still had to make the monthly number work. Take $42,000 financed, close to the current average at around 7%. 60 months costs you roughly $7,900 in interest, stretched to 72, and it is about $9,600. Stretch to 84, and you are near $11,300. The payment falls about $130 a month. The total climbs $3,400. That is the trade being offered to you silently every time somebody says, well, we could get that payment down. But the interest is not even the expensive part. The expensive part is what the length does to your equity. A new car sheds roughly 16 to 20% of its value in the first year. That loss is front-loaded. A loan amortizes back-loaded, so early payments are mostly interest, and your principal barely moves for 2 years. Two curves running opposite directions at different speeds. The gap between them is the window where you owe more than the thing is worth. On a 60-month loan with real money down, that window is short and shallow. On an 84-month loan with nothing down, that window is most of the loan. Every one of Hector's rolls was a 72-month loan, which is exactly why the hole never got a chance to close before he was back in the building. That is not a flaw in the 7-year loan, that is the 7-year loan. And it is worth knowing that roughly 1.73 million vehicles were repossessed in 2024. Hold on to that number because we are going to come back to it and it gets worse. Now the second half of box 3, the rate, and this one genuinely surprises people who consider themselves financially literate. When you finance at a dealership, the dealership is usually not lending you money. It is a middleman. It sends your application to a bank, a credit union, or a captive finance arm. That lender comes back with a buy rate. The buy rate is what they will actually fund your loan at based on your credit. You never see the buy rate. What you see is the sell rate, which is the buy rate plus whatever markup the store adds on top. Think of a hotel calling you a taxi, except the hotel gets to choose what the meter says. That spread is called dealer reserve, and it typically runs 1 to 2.5 percentage points. Research from the Center for Responsible Lending found markups averaging 2.5 points, adding roughly $714 to the average loan. On $40,000 over 60 months, a single point of markup runs you close to $1,000. And here's what settles any argument about whether this is harmless. Because the markup was discretionary, an actual person deciding case by case how much to charge, it produced outcomes regulators found were not evenly distributed. Toyota Motor Credit settled with federal regulators in 2016 for up to $21.9 million in restitution to minority borrowers overcharged this way. Ally, Honda, and Fifth Third settled similar matters. So when the finance manager says, "Let me see what I can get you," take the sentence literally. He is not searching. He already knows. He is deciding. This is the one box Delia disarmed before she ever walked through the door, and we will get to how. Which brings us to box 4, and to Renee and to the butterscotch. She was walked into a small office with a glass door and a bowl of candy that appears to predate the building, and a chair that sits about 2 inches lower than his, which I promise you is not an accident of furniture. On the desk was a laminated menu That is standard, it is called a menu presentation, and it exists because arranging products in a grid makes declining all of them feel vaguely hostile. 4 columns, usually good, better, best, and one so comprehensive it has been given its own name. Here is what was on it and what those things actually cost. An extended warranty, technically a vehicle service contract, priced at 2 to 3 times what the same coverage runs from a direct provider. Dealer profit on one commonly lands between $600 and $1,200. Gap coverage, which pays the difference between what you owe and what the car is worth if it is totaled. Gap is genuinely useful for exactly the people who are underwater, which, as we established, is now a great many of us. Your own insurer or credit union will sell it for $150 to $400. In that room, it is $600 to $1,200. Then the rest of the grid. Paint and fabric protection, around $600 per consumer reports. For sealant applied to paint that left the factory already sealed. Rustproofing around $800 on a vehicle that is mostly plastic and came with a corrosion warranty. VIN etching $100 to $300 to scratch your vehicle identification number into the glass. You can buy a kit that does it for $20. Or you can simply not, which costs nothing and works about as well. Renee said yes to 3. Not because she is naive, she runs a dental practice and reads contracts for a living. It was 7:40 on a Thursday, she had been in that building 5 hours, and her kid needed picking up. And every product was quoted in monthly increments instead of dollars. 41 a month. 22. 19, that is the last trick, and the simplest one. Nothing in that room is priced in dollars. $41 a month across 72 months is $2,952, plus interest because it is financed, which nobody mentions because nobody is required to. Hector has bought a warranty in that chair 3 separate times. He has never once made a claim on one, because he keeps trading the car before the factory coverage even runs out. 2 more things live at the edges of that sheet, and you should be able to spot both from across a parking lot. The first is spot delivery, sometimes called yo-yo financing. You sign, you drive home, you post the picture. Days later, the phone rings, and the financing, you are told, fell through. Come back and re-sign at a higher rate. The contract you took home was conditional, and you almost certainly did not notice. There is no federal rule against the abusive version of this. Consumer advocates have documented buyers who lost both their down payment and their way of getting to work over it. The second is the lease, which does not quote you a rate at all. It quotes a money factor, a decimal so small it reads like a rounding error. 0.00200. Multiply it by 2,400 and that harmless little decimal is 4.8%. It gets marked up like any rate and it does not have to be disclosed to you. Now, some of you have been waiting to raise your hand about the new tax deduction, so let us deal with it. The 2025 federal tax law created a deduction for auto loan interest. It is real. It is also far narrower than the headlines suggested. New vehicles only, no used, no leases, final assembly in the United States, and it phases out at higher incomes. But here is the math. 33,000 financed at 7.2% produces about $2,340 of interest in year 1. In the 22% bracket, that is a tax reduction of roughly $515, which is real money. It is also about 4 months of the extra interest you agreed to by stretching from 60 months to 84. It is a rebate on a decision, not a reason to make one. And now the number I told you to hold on to, because the stakes here stopped being theoretical a while ago. Subprime auto borrowers 60 days or more past due hit 6.74% in December of 2025. Worst reading in a series that goes back 32 years. 32 years. And those 1.73 million repossessions in 2024 are a figure you have to reach back to 2009 to match. Except in 2009, unemployment was near 10%. Right now, it is in the low 4s. That is the part I need you to actually absorb. This is not a recession showing up in the data. There is no crisis to point at. This is what the structure produces during completely ordinary conditions, which means the structure is the crisis. So let me say the thing you are probably not hearing anywhere else. If you are underwater on a car right now, you did not do something stupid. You met the market where it stood. Prices ran ahead of wages. The only lever anyone left you was the length of the loan. And you pulled the lever you were handed. 28% of trade-ins being underwater is not 28% of people being reckless. It is what the standard product does to the standard buyer under standard conditions. And nobody in that building is your enemy either, which is the frustrating part. There is no villain to point at. Just a dozen people whose bonuses are calculated off different lines of the same invoice, none of whom gets paid when you say, actually, I think I will keep my current car another 2 years. By the way, if this is the kind of breakdown you want more of, I open school community where I go deeper on this than YouTube lets me. Link is below. Which brings us finally to Delia, 11 days after Renee, nearly the same car. Delia did 4 things, and none of them required being good at confrontation. She walked in already approved. Credit union first, pre-approval in writing. In the second quarter of 2025, the average 60-month new car loan ran about 5.75% at credit unions against 7.49% at banks. That gap is thousands of dollars. More importantly, it means dealer reserve has nothing to attach to. You cannot be marked up on a rate you already own. If the dealer beats it, wonderful, take theirs. That is the whole point of carrying a number in. She refused to discuss monthly payment. Not aggressively. She just kept answering a different question. What is the out-the-door price on this vehicle? Every single time. She unstacked the boxes. Price first, agreed and written down. Trade second, and she had 2 written offers from other buyers in her bag. Financing third, Backend last, by which point she was negotiating against a fixed total instead of a moving one, and she took 60 months with a real down payment, which meant she was never underwater, which meant she did not actually need GAP. She bought it anyway from her own insurer for $200 instead of $900. She also bought a car that was 2 years old, so the steepest part of the depreciation curve was already somebody else's problem. Used rates are higher, but she was borrowing far less principal, and principal is what you pay interest on. So, $4,300. That is the gap between Delia's deal and Renee's, same car, 11 days apart. $1,000 in rate markup. $700 in gap. Call it $800 on the warranty. $1,800 in the extra 24 months of interest. None of it appeared as a line item, none of it was illegal, and none of it was ever shown to Renee. Now take just that difference, not the payment, not the car, and invest it at 7%. In 10 years, it is about $8,500. In 20, $17,000. In 30, $34,000. And Renee will buy another car, probably 5 or 6 across her life. Hector has already bought 4. If you are already sitting in one of these, and statistically most of you are, the move is not to feel bad about it. It is to check whether you can refinance. Roughly 900,000 borrowers with credit scores in the 720s and above are parked in loans at 9 to 11%, largely because their rate was set in a room where a markup was applied and never disclosed to them. Refinancing is boring. It takes about 20 minutes at a credit union. It is also the only thing in this entire video you can still undo. I am not a financial advisor, and this is not financial advice. Every figure here is a snapshot that will need checking against whatever quarter you are standing in. The structure, though, does not move. The structure is the entire point. So on the 3rd of next month, when that notification lands, do not just feel it. Open it. Find the rate. Because the person across that desk was never selling you a vehicle. He was selling you a payment, and the car is just the thing they hand you so it feels like you bought something.